December 1944, the Battle of the Bulge. December 1944, the Battle of the Bulge. Hitler throws everything he has left into one last desperate gamble in the West. At the tip of the spear is an elite SS Panzer unit, Kampfgruppe Peiper, led by the infamous Joachim Peiper. Their mission: punch through the American lines, cross the Meuse River, and capture the vital port of Antwerp, splitting the Allied armies in two. But this entire audacious plan was built on a knife's edge, a fatal assumption that would seal its doom before it even truly began. The German high command knew they didn't have enough fuel. They were counting on Peiper's panzers, capturing American supply depots along the way. Think about that. The success of the most critical offensive of the war depended on the enemy generously leaving their fuel cans behind. Peiper's combat group, with its formidable Tiger II and Panther tanks, was allocated just over 30,000 gallons of fuel. This was only enough to get them about 50 miles. The problem? Their first major objective, the Meuse River, was 65 miles away. The math simply didn't add up from day one. Then, on December 17th, something incredible happened. Near the village of Honsfeld, Peiper's men stumbled upon an abandoned American supply dump. What they found was a jaw-dropping miracle: 50,000 gallons of gasoline just sitting there. To the Germans, this was an unimaginable treasure. It was more fuel than an entire German division might receive in 6 months. A wave of elation must have swept through the ranks. Maybe this crazy plan could work after all. But for Joachim Peiper, this discovery wasn't a moment of triumph. It was a moment of crushing, soul-destroying realization. He understood something profound in that instant. Why would the Americans abandon this much fuel? Why didn't they even bother to destroy it? The only possible answer was that to them, 50,000 gallons was nothing. It was pocket change. It was a rounding error. At that moment, Peiper reportedly knew the war was lost. The enemy he was fighting operated on a scale of material wealth that was simply beyond German comprehension. And he was absolutely right. Let's look at the staggering numbers. In 1944 alone, the United States produced 1.8 billion barrels of crude oil. Germany, even when you include its synthetic fuel plants and captured oil fields, managed only 33 million barrels. That's less than 2% of what the U.S. produced. The total Allied to Axis oil production ratio was nearly 50-1. How can you win a modern, mechanized war against an enemy that has 50 times more fuel than you? Can't. And it was getting worse for Germany. Relentless Allied bombing campaigns had systematically targeted Germany's synthetic fuel industry. Production had collapsed. In April of 1944, they produced 175,000 tons of synthetic fuel. By September, just 5 months later, that number had plummeted to a mere 5,000 tons. The German war machine was literally running out of gas, grinding to a halt not from combat losses, but from empty fuel tanks. Meanwhile, the Allies were demonstrating a logistical capability that was just as devastating as their bomber fleets. They had the Red Ball Express, a colossal convoy system of nearly 6,000 trucks running non-stop, delivering over 12,000 tons of supplies to the front lines every single day. In fact, the Red Ball Express itself used more fuel each month than the entire German army group facing them received. Even more incredible was the Allied pipeline network. Operation Pluto, pipelines under the ocean, laid flexible pipelines across the English Channel. These, combined with other networks laid across France, were soon pumping over 1 million gallons of fuel to the front every single day. While German panzers were being rationed with thimbles of fuel, the Allies were literally flooding the continent with it. By December 1944, American forces in Europe were consuming 1.2 million gallons of fuel per day. But their logistical tail was so efficient, they were receiving 1.4 million gallons per day. They were actually building up a surplus, stockpiling reserves in the middle of one of the largest battles of the war. This brings us back to Peiper's offensive. After his initial advance, he found himself facing a new American tactic: denial by destruction. The Americans, now fully aware of the Germans' desperate need for fuel, began systematically destroying their own depots before they could be captured. At the town of Stavlet, U.S. engineers faced a gut-wrenching decision. A massive fuel dump containing nearly 2.2 million gallons of gasoline lay directly in Peiper's path. They set it ablaze. Single act of destruction denied Peiper enough fuel to drive his entire Kampfgruppe all the way to Antwerp and back. In the first week of the battle alone, the Americans deliberately burned over 8 million gallons of fuel. This was more than the total amount allocated to the entire German offensive. The psychological impact on the average German soldier was profound. They had been fed propaganda about a decadent, weak America. But what they saw on the battlefield told a different story. They found American positions littered with half-eaten food rations, discarded packs of cigarettes, and mountains of supplies. They saw GS using gasoline to wash their clothes or start fires for warmth, an act that would have been a capital offense in the German army. This wasn't weakness. It was a display of unimaginable, casual abundance. It shattered their morale and made them realize they were fighting a foe from another world. For Peiper, the end was inevitable. After advancing just 20 miles, his tanks had already burned through 40% of their initial fuel. He pushed on, but his spearhead became stretched, isolated, and, most importantly, immobile. The American pocket closed around him at the village of La Glisse. His mighty Tiger to tanks, the most feared armored vehicles of the war, became nothing more than expensive, stationary pillboxes. On the night of December 23rd, the reality was undeniable. The fuel was gone. There was no rescue coming. Peiper gave the order to abandon his vehicles. 39 tanks and 70 half-tracks, most of them perfectly intact and combat-ready, were left behind simply because they couldn't move. Peiper and his remaining men slipped away on foot, their great armored charge ending not in a blaze of glory, but with a long, cold walk back through the snow.